Welcome to another RMS support tutorial video. Our topic for this lesson is correcting obligations linked to the wrong CLIN in a modification, Part 2. In Part 1, we discussed how to correct award CLINs linked to the wrong obligation. For instructions on how that is done, please see the link in the description box below. Just as a reminder, that process only works if the CLIN has not been paid on. In this video, we will go over what indications to look for to determine if your obligations are linked incorrectly, when this process can be used, how to uncomplete a completed modification if the CLIN hasn't been paid on, and the step-by-step process for how to correct the links between the funding accounts, PRNCs, and obligations in the modification and the change request. Now, let's get started. Indications that your obligation is linked incorrectly to a CLIN usually show up in two places. The first place is in the funding view, shown here, listing all of the obligations for a CLIN in a modification, which we will discuss in more detail later in this tutorial. The next, more often seen location is in the Progress Payments Obligation tab, as seen here. There is an error message that states obligations are over-obligated. This is an indication that the CLINs and the obligations are not linked correctly. Another place to check is the document package. Navigate to the document package and open up the government document package by double-clicking on it. Then open up the file that you see. This is the Standard Calculations documentation page. On this page, what you are looking for are lines that say earnings shifted from and a ratio of less than 1, as seen here. Since we know that Obligation 6 was recently linked in a modification, we know, or suspect, that the issue is in the linking of the modification. Next, I'll walk you through how to check the linking in the modification and the following steps in how to correct that. Close the file and go back to the contract menu so we can open up the modification in question. Navigate to the Contract Modifications module and then open up the modification in question. If the modification has been marked complete, opening the funding information will result in an error. So you won't be able to look at the funding here. However, if you go over to the Release Mod tab, now we're going to uncomplete this just by checking on this Modification Complete checkbox. We can now access the funding information by double-clicking on one of the CLINs and then clicking on the Funding button. If you do not see the obligation line item showing at this point in time, then your obligation has been incorrectly linked to the CLIN. Each district's policy is different on the process of how to correct this if the CLIN has already been paid on. It is very important that if the CLIN has already been paid on, please consult with your district's policy. However, if the CLIN has not been paid on, then you can start here to correct the links. Please note, for this demonstration, we will be showing a worst-case scenario where all the links have been set up incorrectly. However, your case may not need to follow all of these steps. The first step is to determine which obligation line item should be linked to which funding account and PRNC line item. The easiest way to see all the funding accounts in RMS is to click the Show All Obligation Line Items radio button and take a screenshot or write down the results. Then go to CFMS and verify the obligations tied to this modification. Once that is done, I need to click the back button, and at this point I need to remove the government signature date. It is very important that you remember this date. Now that I have that saved, I can safely remove this date, press the delete key. Now at this point I can go to the SF30-1 tab. The first thing that you do is come down to this funding account, double click on it, and then remove the amount from the wrong PRAC item. And again, that's by double clicking in here and pressing the delete key to remove the entry and then add 0. Now click the back button to save the changes. Once that is saved, now you can go into the change request by double clicking the change request here and then going to the status funding tab. Now from here, you might have to do a little bit of math in order to find out where all of this information goes. There are two funding accounts that fund this mod. However, the total was only entered on one of the funding accounts, resulting in the obligations being linked incorrectly. You will need to do some math to determine how much goes on each funding account prior to proceeding. As you can see here, I've already done the math. So for funding account 85, I need to enter this amount. So in the change request for account 85, double click on the change amount column and enter the correct amount. Now I need to add the correct amount onto funding account 65. For funding account 65, I need to enter this amount. So in the change request for account 65, double click on the change amount column and enter the correct amount. Now just verify that the change request amount is the same as before. Once done, now I can click the back button and go back to my funding inside the modification. Then the next step is to add the amounts to the correct PR&C line items in the funding for the modification. To do that, double-click on the first funding account. From here, you will need to refer back to your math to determine what amount goes on which PRAC line items. For funding account 85, PRAC 792, line item 1, add the correct total by double-clicking in the amount column for that row and type in that number. Next, we need to enter the correct amounts for funding account 85 on PRAC number 466, line numbers 3 and 5. Enter those amounts in the amount column the same as before. Click on the back button to save those changes. Next, you will need to repeat the process for any other funding accounts in the modification. Do this by double-clicking on the next funding account. Click the back button to save the changes and then navigate to the Release Mod tab. Then enter the previously removed government signature date. Once the date is entered, at this point you're going to need to go through each of these CLINs and start with the first CLIN by double-clicking on it, then clicking on the funding button. Next, remove the amount from the wrong obligation line item by double-clicking in that box, hit delete, and then enter 0. After that, enter the amount in the correct obligation line item box again by double-clicking in the amount and typing the correct amount. Finally, click on the Next and then the Finish buttons to save these changes. Then click the back button to return to the mod view and repeat this process for each CLIN in the modification. Note, at any point in this process, if the obligation line item doesn't show up in the funding button without clicking on the Show All Obligations radio button, then the funding, PRAC numbers, or PRAC line numbers are still linked incorrectly, and you will need to go back and correct those. So now we'll do the same thing for CLIN number 2. We'll zero out the incorrect line and we'll put the money on the correct, click on Next and Finished, then go on to CLIN number 3, do the same thing, zero out the incorrect and add money to the correct line item, Next and Finished. Then we're going on to CLIN 4, again, zero out and add money to the correct line item, Next and Finished. And on 5, same thing, zeroing out the money, adding the money to the right one, clicking Next and Finished. And in CLIN 6, no changes are needed. After you have corrected all of the CLINs, click on the Modification Complete checkbox. Since the pay activities have already been balanced, you do not need to go back to balance them again. Just click Yes and return to the invoice. You're going to go back to the Additional Earnings tab. You're going to uncheck the total allowed earnings for this pay period entered. Uncheck that. Recheck that to recalculate all of the information. You're going to go back to the Obligations tab, and the error message that said it was over-obligated is now missing. Now, I do have an error message because I didn't enter the invoice receipt date for this particular invoice. Now, there are no more errors. Next, verify the obligation disbursement of funds is correct, and then you can check to verify that the calculations are now a ratio of 1 and no longer show earnings shifted due to a negative accrual. Go to the Document Package tab, open the Government Document Package, and then choose the file with the most current date. Double-click on that file to open it, and verify that the calculations are now correct. In summary, we discussed the indications of an obligation linked incorrectly to CLIN, when to use this process, how to uncomplete a mod if the CLIN hasn't been paid on, and the step-by-step process of correcting the links in the CLIN. We hope you found this video informative, and thanks for watching.